No, I can't laugh yet. I've got to hold it in.
No way. Isn't this obvious that Donald Trump's enemies are at work? I mean, just when we thought that his case has been buried, that it's been thrown out, it's been dissolved, boom! It was said that the US president-elect, Donald Trump, has been ordered for sentencing in his New York criminal prosecution case. I mean, I thought they said because he's now the president, I mean, he's got immunity. Is he supposed to be sentenced? Because I don't understand. And remember, this appearance that he's been ordered for is going to be on the 10th of January. Yes, he's been ordered to appear for sentencing on 10th of January. Just 10 days before his presidential inauguration. How is it possible? No, make it make sense. How is it possible? Is he not going to be functioning as a president in prison? I don't understand. Someone that has been okay, is it this US president-elect that is confusing people? People are saying he's not yet the president. He's the president-elect. I don't know the difference. What is the difference between president-elect and president? No, are you people going to bring or elect another president? He's already the president. So how is it possible that Donald Trump is going to be sentenced 10 days before his presidential inauguration? How possible is it? Is it not clear who is doing this to Donald Trump? Who exactly is behind this? Because last I checked, he is the president and he should be given immunity. So I don't understand what is happening. This whole thing is so confusing. How is it possible for a president to be sentenced just 10 days? 10 days before his presidential inauguration. How is that possible? Make it make sense.
DT have been convicted in a hush money case and is said to be sentenced on 10th January 2025. This case involves 34 counts of falsifying businesses records related to payments made to his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to reimburse a $130,000 payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Trump has appealed the conviction and is seeking to delay the sentencing, arguing that his reaction as president should grant him immunity. However, the judge has indicated that Trump will not face jail time and is likely to receive an unconditional discharge, meaning the conviction will stand but without imprisonment, fines, or probation. What's up, folks? Welcome to the channel. We've got different Americans' reaction about this issue. Let's take our time and watch this reaction from different people.
Is anybody else concerned about the Trump sentencing thing? Like, if you did not know, Trump is still set to be sentenced for the hush money case that he was convicted of on January 10th, which incidentally is the same day that the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on the TikTok ban. So basically everybody better have your popcorn ready for that day. But anyways, everybody's acting like it's going to be no biggie because his sentence is going to be deferred until after he exits office. But that is what is concerning to me, because what do you mean that we're going to have a megalomaniac who is now going to be incentivized via prison time not to exit office? That is exactly what's happening also in Israel right now, and we all see how that is going, right? And I'm seeing a ton of people talking about his sentencing and what they hope happens and how it's insane that it might probably even be deferred until after he leaves office. But I have not seen anybody else express concern about the fact that this man would then in essence be incentivized to do whatever is within his power to remain in office for the rest of his natural life. Is this not concerning to anybody else? What is going on, you guys?
Donald Trump's criminal conviction has just been upheld by a federal judge who says he will sentence Donald Trump on January 10th. The judge did indicate he is leaning towards giving Trump an unconditional discharge, which is a rare and very lenient punishment where basically you get no punishment at all and there's no conditions on your discharge. You don't have don't have to do anything. Trump was looking at 4 years of jail time possibly for his crimes. Now, unlucky for Trump, the unconditional discharge would still mean that Trump officially becomes a felon on January 10th when the sentence is meted out. Trump would be the first felon elected to the White House and to serve as president. You'll recall that Trump was found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records in order to hide the relationship he had with porn star Stormy Daniels, who Trump slept with while his wife had just given birth to their son Barron, and then paid her $130,000 in hush money to make the porn star go away right before the 2016 election. Trump was found guilty of those charges, and as I said, on January 10th, he will be an official felon.
So Donald Trump has just been ordered to appear in court to be sentenced to prison for the crimes he committed in New York in the hush money case. So the judge just rejected Donald Trump's motion to have the case dismissed, the one where Donald Trump was convicted on 34 felony counts of falsifying his business records in the first degree. And the judge has scheduled this hearing for January 10th, which forces Donald Trump to appear in court either in person or virtually. Now, in the court ruling, the judge writes that Donald Trump's presidential immunity does not apply to this case because this is a state investigation, not a federal one. Let's hope Judge Merchan cracks down on Donald Trump with a prison sentence, which would make Donald Trump the first president in American history to be sentenced to jail a week before he gets sworn in to the Oval Office.
Don't be so excited about Trump's sentencing next Friday, January 10th. Judge in Trump's hush money case expected to sentence him to unconditional discharge. So the judge is going to sentence him to an unconditional discharge out of respect for the presidential immunity doctrine. Trump faces the possibility of 4 years in prison, but everyone is speculating that it will definitely be a lot lighter. But of course, Trump's legal team is trying to intervene and stop the sentencing. Trump's spokesperson, Stephen Chung, sent out a statement. President Trump must be allowed to continue the presidential transition process and to execute the vital duties of the presidency, unobstructed by the remains of this or any remnants of the witch hunts. There should be no sentencing. As we know, Trump was found guilty back in May. 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payment made to an adult film actress Stormy Daniels in order to boost his electoral prospects in the 2016 presidential election. Anyways, even with this sentencing, he's not going to go to prison, but there still is a possibility that after 4 years after he finishes his term, he will go from the White House to the Big House.
I took a nap and woke up to a ton of stuff. Mike Johnson actually won the speakership, and Justice Merchan out of New York issued a sentencing date in the Donald Trump criminal hush money case, which in May he was convicted of those 34 felonies for falsifying business records. What this means is that in just 10 days, Donald Trump will be sentenced for those felonies, and it can range from anything from an unconditional discharge, which means essentially the conviction stands on his record, but he won't have probation, he won't have any sort of jail time, prison time, up to 4 years in prison for these felonies. Now, this sentencing will come 10 days before the inauguration, and Justice Merchan has already indicated that he will likely issue an unconditional discharge as the most viable solution to ensure finality, that Donald Trump can still pursue his appeals against him, and he'll unlikely not serve a prison time. Instead, he'll get this unconditional discharge, and that'll be issued out of respect for the presidential immunity doctrine. Now, Justice Merchan did say he needs to hear directly from defendant Donald Trump before he's able to make a full sentencing, because he needs to see if his disdain for the judiciary and for the criminal justice system has waned in the months since he was convicted, that his disdain for the third branch of government, whether state or federal, in New York or elsewhere, it is a matter of public record. And indeed, the defendant has gone to great lengths to broadcast on social media and other forums his lack of respect for judges, juries, grand juries, and the justice system as a whole. And Justice Merchan goes on to say that he needs to talk to the defendant directly to see if this has lessened and if he has improved himself and feels remorse for his actions. So barring that, if we see a great Donald Trump explosion of anger, he's likely to get a harsher sentence than just this unconditional discharge. We could see our first president in history that's on probation. We could see our first president in history that instead of going to Mar-a-Lago or Bedminster on the weekends is going to a prison in New York on work release during the week. I'm for it. It's in 7 days, 10 days before the inauguration day. We'll see how this goes.
Well, it appears as though Donald Trump is going to get sentenced before he takes office. Yes, that is correct. Judge Juan Marchand has ordered that Donald Trump will be sentenced on January 10th for his 34 felony counts in New York regarding his payments to Stormy Daniels and that cover-up. At this point in time, the judge is signaling basically to everybody, because Donald Trump takes office 10 days after the sentencing, that there won't be any sort of jail time for him regarding these felony counts. I'm unsure of what reality in America somebody could be found guilty of 34 felony counts and not serve any jail time, but apparently that's where we're at if you're rich and white named Donald Trump. But color me surprised, because I didn't think he'd be sentenced before he was inaugurated.
This is unexpected news. Donald Trump has just been ordered to appear in person or virtually for sentencing. He has been ordered by Judge Marchand, the judge overseeing the New York hush money case, to appear for his sentencing next week, January 10th. Trump had been found guilty on 34 felony counts in this case, and his team had been trying to appeal this case, get the case dismissed and thrown out entirely. That has been unsuccessful. But we did not expect Judge Marchand to issue sentencing or an order for sentencing before Trump was in office. We were expecting this to be deferred until after the fact. Well, we could have a president who has been sentenced to jail time serving in the White House. A man who would not be eligible to vote in many states would be serving as president of the United States. This is really something that we have never seen before in United States politics, and we did not expect this to happen. What happens on the 10th, we will not know. But what we do know, or can likely infer, is that any sentence imposed on Trump will not be enforced or enacted until after his term as president is over. Guess we're going to have to wait and see what happens next week.
Good news, bad news out of New York for the convicted felon. The good news is that Judge Juan Marchand is following through on sentencing Donald Trump after he was convicted by a jury of his peers on all 34 felony counts for falsifying business records. The bad news is that because the American people gave back the keys to the White House to Donald Trump, he will likely not face any jail time. That said, we'll all find out on January 10th what Donald Trump's punishment will be. Now, of course, many think that Donald Trump is getting off easy here. To his credit, Judge Marchand made it clear in his 18-page order that both Donald Trump and his lawyer's conduct throughout this entire case was inappropriate and shameful. He outlined some important points in his order, which is why I'm going to walk through it with you now. In short, this order settles a number of motions that Donald Trump desperately filed in order to overturn the verdict and to dismiss the indictment altogether. Unsurprisingly, Donald Trump positioned himself as a victim. He cited the Supreme Court ruling that gave him blanket presidential immunity, the Presidential Transition Act, and the Supremacy Clause, all as grounds for dismissal of the indictment. He essentially accused the New York District Attorney's Office of unlawful conduct that was politically motivated against him, and of the court of violating his constitutional rights. He also accused the jury of being biased against him, and witnesses, including Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, of perjuring themselves. It's in this footnote where Judge Marchand puts his foot down and tells Donald Trump and his lawyers to shut the fuck up. He states, quote, "The defense has represented their client zealously. There have, however, been instances when, in written submissions, counsel has come dangerously close to crossing the line of zealous representation and the professional advocacy one would expect from members of the bar and officers of the court. And this court has at times made counsel aware of its observations and concerns."
He adds, quote, "Now, however, counsel has resorted to language, indeed rhetoric, that has no place in legal pleadings. For example, countless times in their motion to dismiss, counsel accuses the prosecution and this court of engaging in unlawful and unconstitutional conduct." And he wasn't done there. He states, quote, "Those words by definition mean criminally punishable, which is according to Black's Law Dictionary. Viewed in full context and mindful of the parties to this action, such arguments in the broader picture have the potential to create a chilling effect on the third branch of government. Indeed, Chief Justice Roberts, in his 2024 year-end report on the federal judiciary, felt compelled, quote, to address 4 areas of illegitimate activity that, in my view, do threaten the independence of judges on which the rule of law depends: violence, intimidation, disinformation, and threats to defy lawfully entered judgments." And you know he's over their bullshit when he quotes Chief Justice John Roberts. And of course, that footnote didn't end on that page. It continues. And he continues to quote Chief Justice John Roberts, saying, quote, "Public officials, too, regrettably have engaged in recent attempts to intimidate judges. For example, suggesting political bias in the judge's adverse rulings without a credible basis for such allegations. Attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings in cases are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed." And Roberts is not the only Supreme Court justice that he quotes. He continues, quote, "Judicial independence is worth preserving. As my late colleague Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote, an independent judiciary is essential to the rule of law in any land. Yet it is vulnerable. It can be shattered if the society law exists to serve does not take care to assure its preservation." Then he cites Ginsburg again, writing, quote, "Of course, the courts are no more infallible than any other branch. In hindsight, some judicial decisions are wrong, sometimes egregiously wrong." And then he reasons, quote, "Wrong, not unlawful or deliberately violative of a litigant's constitutional rights. And our rule of law provides a system of appellate review for higher courts to consider a litigant's claim of error below. This court is in complete agreement with Chief Justice John Roberts' views on this subject. Dangerous rhetoric is not a welcome form of argument and will have no impact on how the court renders this or any other decision." And with that said, Judge Merchan reminds Donald Trump that a jury of his peers were unanimous in convicting him on all 34 felony counts. He notes that the sanctity of a jury verdict and the deference that must be accorded to it is a bedrock principle in our nation's jurisprudence. And he notes that even an examination of how a jury reached its verdict must be approached with caution, as only extraordinary circumstances warrant second-guessing the deliberative process. And thus he concludes that it is understandably rare for a trial court to overturn a unanimous jury verdict. Now, Judge Merchan says that the primary issue before this court is whether an incoming president must be afforded the same immunity protections from a state prosecution as a sitting president. And he says that so far as this court can discern, this is without precedent. Next, Donald Trump tried to claim that because he's an incoming president, he is immune from all criminal prosecution. And Judge Merchan said that this court finds that presidential immunity from criminal process for a sitting president does not extend to an incoming president. To begin, the Constitution dictates that only a president, after taking the oath of office, has the authority of the chief executive. An incoming president does not. Accordingly, an incoming president is not permitted to avail himself of the protections afforded to the individual occupying that office. He cites the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which held that the Presidential Transition Act of 1963 provides money and office space to an incoming president's transition team, but does not and cannot deem any of the incoming president's actions official before he or she complies with the Oath and Affirmation Clause. In terms of this bullshit immunity claim, Judge Merchan uses Donald Trump's own motions against him to undercut his claims here. He writes, quote, "Undoubtedly, the transition period between November and the taking of the presidential oath is one filled with enormous responsibility. Yet, even defendant in his motion refers to the presidential immunity as one relating specifically to a sitting president no fewer than 33 times. Trump even tried to use the dismissal of his federal cases as reason for dismissing this case. Judge Merchan just rolled his eyes and wrote, quote, "Defendant argues that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's decision to dismiss the defendant's federal indictments is evidence of a mandate that all criminal cases pending against the incoming president must cease immediately. The vastly different procedural posture of this case renders any comparison to the special counsel's indictments unpersuasive." And he says that doesn't matter anyway because while defendant now claims this court cannot and must not sentence defendant, the record is clear that defendant not only consented to, but in fact requested the very adjournment that led us down the path we are on. As the parties are aware, it was on defendant's application without opposition from the people that sentence was adjourned until after November. He makes it clear, quote, any claim defendant may have that circumstances have changed as a result of defendant's victory, while convenient, is disingenuous. He also emphasizes what Donald Trump is trying to do here. He writes, quote, defendant seeks, in essence, a form of retroactive immunity. And continues, writing, quote, essentially what defendant asks this court to do is to create or at least recognize two types of presidential immunity, then select one as grounds to dismiss the instant matter. And then he cites the DA's response to Donald Trump's motion. They pointed out that Donald Trump, quote, seeks an action by the court akin to a retroactive form of presidential immunity. Judge Merchan added that it would be a misuse of discretion for this court to create or recognize either of these two new forms of presidential immunity in the absence of legal authority. The defendant has presented no valid argument to convince this court otherwise. Now, in terms of Donald Trump's claims that the evidence at trial being weak and that the DA relied on perjured testimony from Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, as well as evidence violating his rights, Judge Merchan said this is all meritless. As for Donald Trump's claims that he's an upstanding citizen, Judge Merchan was unmoved. He wrote, quote, defendant's disdain for the third branch of government, whether state or federal, in New York or elsewhere is a matter of public record. Indeed, defendant has gone to great lengths to broadcast on social media and other forms his lack of respect for judges, juries, grand juries, and the justice system as a whole. And he points out that this behavior led him to hold Donald Trump and his lawyers in contempt. And he says that his order of contempt is not the only instance in which defendant has been held in contempt or sanctioned by a court. As for the jurors being biased, Judge Merchan writes, what defendant is asking this court to do is to assume that the jurors who self-identified were truthful, while those who remained were not. That conclusion is illogical and entirely unsupported. As for Donald Trump's claims about public confidence in this case because of the court's disqualifying conflict, Judge Merchan was unpersuaded. He cited the court's rejections of Donald Trump's motions to force Judge Merchan to recuse. He writes that, quote, defendant continues to mount the same baseless attacks in each succeeding motion, albeit with increasing ire. The frequency of the claims and escalating rhetoric in each subsequent motion does not render the claims true or valid. They are not, and it is irresponsible and deeply concerning for counsel to insist on advancing these claims. He adds, quote, to be clear, this is not the only example of defendant pursuing a claim with increasing indignation while simultaneously failing to acknowledge that this court's rulings on those subjects have been repeatedly upheld. Judge Merchan is adamant that he wants this case closed, and for that to happen, he needs to sentence Donald Trump on January 10th. And he ordered it so.
In news that's neither shocking nor surprising, President-elect Donald Trump will not be sentenced to jail time for his recent hush money conviction. That's right, Trump, who was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records related to payments made before the 2016 election, won't be heading to a cell anytime soon. A New York judge decided Friday that Trump won't face any legal penalties even though his conviction still stands. Yep, you heard that correctly. Trump is still technically a convicted felon, but he's also about to be president again. Judge Juan Merchan upheld the conviction, meaning Trump's legal record remains, but since Trump was reelected and is now the president-elect, the judge ruled that there's no point in imposing a sentence. He basically said, let's wrap this up, while noting Trump's right to appeal. For those wondering whether Trump's conviction might be erased later on, Merchan made it clear that it isn't happening for now. According to CNN, the appeal process will continue, but it's no rush since Trump won't be facing any punishment that could interfere with his presidential duties. And I know that y'all probably have a bunch of questions, so let me try to answer them in advance. So, question 1, will Trump's conviction stick forever? Well, it depends on how successful his appeal is. But for now, the answer is yes, he's still a convicted felon. This makes Trump the first person ever to take the oath of office while being convicted of a crime. He continues his reign as a history maker and record breaker. So, with 16 days until Inauguration Day, how are y'all feeling? Y'all all right?
Are we just going to see what's going to happen on 10th January? Because we're not sure what's going to happen because Trump will not go to jail. Trump will not get any punishment. But I think he will attend the court. And it will be like 10 days to the inauguration ceremony. Yeah, that will be the day DT will be in the office. So I don't know the reason why this kind of charges or this kind of conviction come this time. I don't know. Maybe there might be a reason. So we have to wait and see what is going on. But it's a chaos, as you can see. So people are very curious to see what's going to happen. Why this judge have done such kind of thing. So it is very confusion that awaits on this Friday on 10th January 2025. So we're gonna know what's going on and we will see what will happen. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. Let's catch up in the next episode.